fall in love, it will.
Good afternoon from Castle Goring, from Mickey and from me. Mickey is feeling very loving this afternoon, aren't you, Mickey Booney, Baggy Booney? Well, we have a lot of ground to cover, so I think I will plunge right in by saying that many people have sent in questions about the petition, and I'm not going to read out any of them. I'm going to sort of encapsulate. Several people seem to think that it's a bad idea to have a petition that would allow Prince Harry to become Prince Henry of Wales and Meghan to become Princess Henry of Wales. Well, if you look at the petition very carefully, you will see that the petition is actually inviting Harry to approach the Queen to give up all of his royal titles, styles, and rank. You need to understand there is a difference between a peerage and a title. Harry has a peerage called the Dukedom of Sussex. He has a title as Prince Henry of Wales. He has, even if it's not able to be used, the style of Royal Highness as well. In the petition, Harry is asking his grandmother to allow him to put into abeyance all his titles, those that are a peerage and those that are not. All his titles are royal titles, and all of them will be put into abeyance if the petition becomes sufficiently successful that it would appeal to him. I think it's a very honourable way of resolving a very awkward situation. I think that this whole problem has become exceedingly painful for the family, for his loved ones, for everybody at the palace, for much of the British public, for much of the Commonwealth public, for even much of the American public. And this is an honourable out for everybody. So those of you who hesitate to sign it on the basis of the fact that you think when he stops calling himself Duke of Sussex, Meghan is going to be allowed to call herself Princess Henry, or as some of you have suggested, Princess Meghan. Well, she's not Princess Meghan. She's never going to be Princess Meghan. She is Princess Henry. But she won't be able to use that either, because Harry won't have any of them once he appeals to the Queen to put his titles into abeyance. So I hope I've made that clear. So now if we can move on to the other questions, shall we? Okay. Ali Cook says, Meghan and Harry are the new Duke and Duchess of Windsor. He will regret his choices like Edward VIII, but she will leave him, unlike Wallis, once he is no longer useful to her. What do you think, Lady C? Well, Ali Cook, I think that's a very good question, and many people have asked it in various forms, not only recently, but over the last several months. I would say that in some ways they are the new equivalent of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, in that they are semi-detached royals, in exile effectively, very controversial, but there are significant differences. Meghan set out to bag Harry and has done a brilliant job of not only bagging him, but tightening the noose around the sack that the game is held in. Game as in birds. She wanted marriage. She wanted titles. She wanted rank. She wanted public acclamation and approbation. And when she married Harry, having promised that she would partake of royal duties and that she was eager to partake of them, it turned out to be a mirage. Wallis never wanted to marry David, as the Duke of Windsor was known within his family. Wallis wanted to remain married to Ernest Simpson, and she wanted to be David's mistress. She wanted to be the maîtresse en titre. She wanted him to remain king. She thrilled to the idea by her own admission. Read The Heart Has Its Reasons if you doubt what I'm saying. She loved the royal panoply. She loved the whole royal scenario. Her idea of hell on earth was what she got. She wanted to be safely married to a man she loved, while being the mistress of a man for whom she had a degree of affection and tolerance. But she was not in love with David the way she was in love with Ernest Simpson, or had been in love with Win Spencer, her first husband. She was very frank about all of this. You know, to her credit, she wasn't pretending to be anything but bedazzled, impressed, captivated, and like a baby in a candy shop. She tried to get him to stay on the throne. She encouraged him to stay on the throne. If you have any doubts about what I'm saying, read many books. Lord Beaverbrook's memoirs. You can also read The Heart Has Its Reasons. You can read the Duke of Windsor's autobiography. You can read my book, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. I think it's called The Untold Life of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, actually. And it goes into great detail about how Elizabeth ended up on the throne with her husband Bertie, who was known as George VI. I got a lot of this from my sister-in-law Ziadie-Campbell, who was Lord Beaverbrook's granddaughter, who played an active part in the abdication crisis. I got a lot of it from John Pringle, an old friend of mine who was their ADC in the Bahamas during the Second World War. I got a lot of it from my stepmother-in-law, Margaret, Duchess of Argyll, who was a great friend of theirs. I got quite a lot of it, ironically enough, from a priest who was a great family friend of ours called Father Philip Hart, who was a great friend of Princess Alice, Countess of Athlone, who used to spend 6 months of every year in Jamaica. And Princess Alice was the sister-in-law of Queen Mary. So I got information from several sources about what really went on with David and Wallis. He wanted her to become queen. She didn't want it. He wanted her to then become Duchess of Lancaster. She didn't want that either. She didn't actually want to divorce Ernest Simpson, but she found herself in an invidious position because her great friend Mary Kirk Raffray was having an affair with Ernest Simpson and wanted to marry Ernest, and indeed did marry Ernest, produced a son, and then died very shortly after, I think, if memory serves me correctly, of a brain tumour. Of course, history is to an extent written by the victors, at least in the first and second instances. At the moment, there is on British television, on Channel 5, a 3-part series on the Queen Mother's life, and I was a participant in that. Sorry. There were also several other participants. And the facts are emerging. It has to be said, I was the first person who wrote what everybody is now starting to say. And when I wrote it in 2012, I think it was, when my book, The Untold Life of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was published, Lynn Barber in the Sunday Times, which was going to serialize it and did a whole feature on it in the Sunday Times magazine. And Lynn Barber, who's one of the most eminent journalists in this country, said her article ended with, I like her, I believe her, buy the book. So Lynn Barber was very much in favour, and she, as I say, is one of the most eminent journalists in the country. There was one hack who is one of the go-to creeps that becomes the best friend of every corpse as soon as they're dead, and writes articles about his latest best friend, and is very knowledgeable in quotes, who rubbished my book and said that Princess Alice, I don't know whether he was referring to Princess Alice of Gloucester or Princess Alice of Athlone, but it's there in black and white in print, that Princess Alice had told him that the Queen was conceived when her parents were on a trip to Africa. Well, that was really odd, because I think they were there 14 to 16 months before the Queen's birth. And he rubbished my book using that lie. And it's got to be a lie, because I'm damn sure that neither Princess Alice told this jerk any such thing. And in fact, I rang up Liz Hartley, who is the legal manager of Associated Newspapers, and I told her, if you ever dare to print anything like that again, I will sue your clutch a box. And I'm sure she remembers it only too well. Well, the fact of the matter is that Edward VIII was to a large extent shoved off the throne because he was not a malleable king, while George VI was going to be a malleable king. And Edward VIII was surrounded by courtiers he had inherited from his father, all of whom were friends and or allies of his sister-in-law Elizabeth, who, for the record, was flying the kite in the New York Times in 1929 that she and her husband, Bertie, then the Duke of York, would be far more suitable monarchs than Edward VIII would be when he acceded to the throne. That was 7 years before he acceded to the throne. And if I recall correctly, 6 years after she married his brother. So the whole situation there is a lot more layered than it might appear to be. Wallis never wanted to marry David, but she was a decent and an honourable woman. She was also, it has to be said, a lady. She had her reputation tarnished to a large extent by Elizabeth. And this is now gradually starting to be acknowledged. Now, to an extent, I have some understanding of why Elizabeth decided that she wanted to keep the Duke and Duchess of Windsor in exile, because they were a very glamorous couple. The Duke of Windsor, as Edward VIII, was an extremely popular king. As the Prince of Wales, he was the most popular Prince of Wales of all time. She did not want them returning to England because the deal was that after a year abroad they would return and the Duke of Windsor would assume royal duties again as the youngest son, quote unquote, meaning the junior ranking son, because the other 3 brothers now outranked him. 1 was king and 2 were dukes of more older, let's put it that way, of older creation. So for all those reasons, Elizabeth did not want David and Wallis returning. Wallis was very glamorous. She was not a beauty, but she was extremely glamorous, extremely chic, extremely charming. And I tell you, she and Elizabeth had an awful lot in common superficially. They were both highly social, charming, witty, funny, snappy, and actually attractive social beings. There was a lot more in common with them than meets the eye. They were also both quite tough. But Wallis was actually a lot softer a personality than Elizabeth. Wallis was extremely honourable. And when David gave up his throne, she was trapped in a way she had never wanted to be trapped. But she turned herself into the perfect royal duchess. She was the most regal of all of the royal duchesses. She did everything impeccably. Her houses were furnished in the most beautiful taste, with great style. She dressed impeccably. She entertained like no one else on earth. She was well known and acknowledged by all quarters to be the greatest hostess on earth. I don't think any of this sounds like Meghan Markle. But to point out a few more differences. Wallis wanted to be correctly royal and was. David was correctly royal. I met the Duke and Duchess of Windsor on quite a few occasions, and I have to tell you, I was very young at the time. I was 19 and 20 and 18 as well, 18, 19 and 20. And there was no doubt that you were in the presence of a king or an ex-king when you were in his presence. He was a very sad man in many ways, pathetic in some ways, but he absolutely worshipped Wallis, and it is not right to believe that he regretted marrying Wallis. He did not regret marrying Wallis, and she made it her life's business to make sure that he was given a way of life suitable to his former rank. Remember also, he gave up the throne to marry the woman he loved, but he intended to come back, as did she, once she was trapped in the system, to execute their royal duties. There was no question of them sailing off into the sunset, not doing their royal duties, electing to scrimp, scrape, scrounge, and scramble the way the Sussexes have been doing, marching themselves. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor had a degree of dignity that neither Harry nor Meghan possesses. There are other important differences. Meghan considers herself to be way above the royal family. This was one of the problems from when she was living in England. She managed to convince Harry that tradition is a dirty word and that they were way above any of the protocols or systems or practices that restrain royal life and royal activity. She, therefore, has a monumental ego which the Duchess of Windsor did not have. The Duchess of Windsor simply wanted to be a royal mistress. When she became a royal wife, she set out to make her husband proud of her and to give him a close an approximation of royal life outside of England as he had in England. That was her goal, and she achieved it magnificently. They were also very formal formal is the wrong word. They were very correct. The Duke of Windsor was rather formal, but then all of that generation of royalty, and indeed in my generation of royalty, was also very formal. The younger ones are not formal to that extent, but the Duke of Windsor was very formal. Wallis was very correct. Wallis was impeccably born and bred. She was not trash from nowhere. She was from a top Southern family. Had she not divorced Win Spencer, her Uncle Sol would have left her $2.5 million in the early 1930s, which would have made her one of the great heiresses of her day. You see how the victor can rewrite history so that somebody who was impeccably born, impeccably brought up, impeccably behaved socially, can end up being cast as a really rather odious dolly bird. Wallis was not a dolly bird. Yes, also, she was romantic. She wanted love. She gave up a $2.5 million fortune in the early 1930s to marry Ernest Simpson. She didn't have to. She could have stayed and waited until Uncle Saul died, got the money, and then done whatever she wanted to do. She did not. She had honour and integrity, and there was no marching going on. Look at what happens in California. Look at the way they present themselves. You know, Wallis and David's message was living up to a royal standard. Harry and Meghan's message is dispensing with the royal standards. They're too big for them. They don't need them. They're going to show everybody the new way, the better way. They're going to modernize. They don't need the constraints and restraints of royalty. Completely different. And as I said, the Duke of Windsor did not ever regret marrying Wallis. She made it her life's work to ensure that he wouldn't, and he didn't. There are, however, parallels between Harry and his great-great-uncle. No, his great-uncle. No, his great-great-uncle. That's right, his great-great-uncle. There are parallels. The Hanoverian family has always had a tendency to be excessively in love. They are led by their hearts, shall we say? I'm being polite. They're led by their hearts. Politesse. But it is also definitely partly their hearts. It's not only about carnality or pleasure and passion, physical passion, although I'm sure that comes into play. They are excessively attached to their love objects. It was true of the Duke of Windsor. It was true of his brother Bertie, who became George VI. It was true of the previous Duke of Sussex. It was true of Queen Victoria. I can go on and on, but I think you've got the message. They have in that family a propensity for extreme attachment to a love object. And this Harry has in spades. Wallis did not seek to exploit David's love for her, nor did she seek to exploit their royal status. I would respectfully submit that the same cannot be said of Meghan Markle, who is, if her conduct is anything to go by, not only supremely arrogant and egotistical, with the highest opinion of herself that it is possible for anybody to have, whether sane or delusional, and that she also has no compunction about playing and operating at a level that will feather her nest in not only financial ways, but in terms of fame and fortune. Wallis did not want fame. She begged David to not abdicate. She begged him to not marry her. He told her if they didn't get married, he was going to kill himself. And she felt she had no choice but to marry him, because he had given up a throne for her, a throne which she begged him not to give up. Meghan, on the other hand, has managed to convince Harry, although the truth does slip out despite his statement that it was his idea as well. If you remember, in the Oprah program, he said very decidedly that he would have stayed in the royal fold had it not been for Meghan. Meghan has orchestrated this whole situation. Meghan has played Harry, as I've said before, and I will say again, the way a great violinist plays a violin. She has managed to convince him that all his upbringing was defective, that all the self-sacrifice, restraint, decency, humanitarianism, genuine humanitarianism, that is a part of being a royal, was rubbish, and that it was trapping him, and that he needed to be free of all of this, and that they should go to California, and that they should end up making a shed load of money, or as she put it, financial independence. Well, when you're worth over $40 million already, you already are financially independent, especially when you don't have to pay for anything, because the state pretty much pays for everything. Clothes, entertainment, you name it, the state pays for it. So we have to look deeper as to why Meghan thought it was necessary to leave the royal fold and to extricate herself from the royal fold and to extricate Harry from the royal fold. It's all about money. It's all about money. It's all about fame. It's about fame without responsibility. It's about fame without the restraints and constraints of the royal way of life. Now, there is actually something that I can say that I neglected to say when speaking about the petition. And I think since I have remembered it, I will say it here and now. There is actually a precedent of sorts for a prince of a European royal house ceasing to use all royal titles. In the 1920s, Crown Prince Carol of Romania forwent all of his royal titles and his royal status and was for several years known as Monsieur Carol Carryman. That's what he was known as. Harry, of course, would be known as Mr. Henry Windsor, correctly speaking, or if he wants to doff his hat to his grandfather, the one whose last days he helped to make such a misery, Henry Mountbatten Windsor. So there are precedents. But insofar as to go back to the Windsors and the Sussexes, the Duke of Windsor made the supreme sacrifice for the woman he loved. Harry has made a supreme sacrifice for the woman he loves. But one of them was forced into doing it because of the politics of the time, and also, it has to be said, mistakes that King Edward VIII made. Because had he listened to Lord Beaverbrook, had he listened to other advisers, he would have been crowned king, and then he'd have married Wallis, and nobody could have said or done anything about it. But he was encouraged, and I have to say that the hand of Elizabeth does sort of hover in the background where this is concerned. He was encouraged to jump the gun, and by jumping the gun and being really politically naive and honourable as well. He was honourable because he could have given up Wallis, got crowned, and then picked up back with her, but he thought that would be dishonourable. He didn't lie, he didn't cheat. His story remained the same. Can you think of other people whose story keeps on changing on a daily basis? I can. I would have to say the parallels between the Windsors and the Sussexes, although there are some, the differences are greater, significantly greater. And that is why the Duke and Duchess of Windsor deserved to keep their titles. And that is why it is so important that Harry voluntarily invite the Queen to put his into abeyance. Because the Duke of Windsor, contrary to speculation, never was actively involved in politics. The Duchess of Windsor was never actively involved in politics. In fact, she was never involved in politics at all. She had no interest whatsoever in politics, which, ironically enough, is one of the things that militated against her being queen, while Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, Duchess of York, was very interested in politics, but not in party politics, but in power. And Meghan is interested in power, but also in party politics. And she and Harry have made it very clear what political persuasion they not only represent, but actively seek to have in power and to remain in power. These are all significant differences, and these are all reasons why Harry and Meghan, who are also now, let's face facts, so famous that they don't need these titles. Look at how much money they claim to have made. I mean, they claim to have made about $200 million in the last year. Well, if their claims are true, how much more money do they need? So, they should be free to continue making money, but not sullying their royal status and not causing problems for the British and the British people. And on that note, I will say thank you very much for listening. I hope you have enjoyed this. If you have, please like, share, subscribe, and press the notification bell. Thank you very much and goodbye.